The weekly sermons of 45th Street Baptist Church are now available as a podcast through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, or wherever you get your podcasts.
you know how powerful this is? Do you know what it means in your life? Or maybe I should ask the question, does it mean anything in your life? Until you learn how to study it, see what God is saying to you, you'll never really be able to fulfill your purpose. Come on and join us. Join us for 45 minutes of purpose here at 45th Street Baptist Church. I guarantee you, you'll come out thinking differently. And my prayer is, somewhere along the line, you'll find the purpose that God has for you. Come on in and join us.
Welcome to 45 Minutes of Purpose with Reverend Andra D. Sparks.
Hey, good evening, everyone. I'm glad to be with you. I'm happy to be here with you for another Bible study opportunity. It's a wonderful time for us to study. I did get some pretty sad news, very sad news, right before we started this Bible study, though. So I'd ask you if you would to be in prayer for the family of my family, the Holman family. The Holman family had a tragedy to occur in their family today. So please be in prayer for them at this moment in time. Um, more details will be revealed a little bit later, but if you would now just lift up their name, um, the Holman family right now, in prayer. We started our Bible study series last week entitled Being the Church. Being the Church. Um, we are going to continue it today. Last week we had the wonderful opportunity to discuss the entry topic for this study, and that is simply what is a church? What is a church, and what are the principles of a purpose-driven church? What are the principles of a purpose-driven church? We had a wonderful discussion. We centered our discussion on perhaps one of the best known purpose-driven uh, churches in the country. The one who started that title, purpose purpose-driven church, and that is Saddleback Church in California. Today we're going to move into, I think, uh, a much more complicated conversation. What is necessary for you and me to make sure we do to be in accord with what the Bible requires of a church? What does God call us to do to make sure the church is functioning properly? That becomes the issue. We talk about our purposes, but how do we know which churches are functioning in the right manner? How do we know which churches are doing what needs to be done to answer the call of Christ or the calls of Christ? What are the factors that we look at to determine that this church is in accordance with God's word and this one may not be quite doing what it should be doing, because there are literally hundreds of churches open. And I can tell you right now that denomination doesn't matter. Okay. We get so stuck on denomination, but denomination is not the factor. Name the church whatever you will, be a part of whatever organizational group you want to be a part of. That is not going to be the factor that makes the difference. What is going to make the difference is whether or not, and I want to use this word, you are faithful. Faithfulness, faithfulness is in fact the highest calling of the church. Faithfulness to the tenets of God, faithfulness to the tenets of Christ, faithfulness to the things that God requires the church to be in the first place, faithfulness to what Christ told the apostles to do. Faithfulness is the core tenet that we have to adhere to. Now, that's very difficult in this culture. We have to be counter the culture in order to maintain the faithfulness that Christ requires of us. So, counterculture Christians, and this is already going to rub some folks wrong. We have to be counterculture in order to be faithful, because some people believe that you can be fully a part of the culture and be faithful at the same time. And I came to tell you that you're going to find many areas of inconsistency when it comes to your walk and the culture's current requirements. And so, this study tonight, we're going to talk about what are the marks of a faithful church? How do we resist the tendency to just be counterculture for its own sake, for no purpose, not the cause of Christ, but just be against what the current culture is? That's not necessarily being in league with what Christ wants us to be. And then what does faithfulness to the gospel look like in this society, in this contemporary society? So, what are the marks of a faithful church? Don't be anti just to be anti. And what does a faithful church look like in this society? What does it mean to be faithful under these circumstances? What is required to be faithful under these circumstances? If you just read the Gospels open mindedly, most people will see that Jesus was not a conformist. He never just went along to get along. That wasn't Jesus Christ. Um, he tended to go against the grain, if you will. He was continuously saying and doing things that were not conventional and that were controversial according to the standards of that time. But he wasn't trying to be a rebel. That wasn't his cause. And see, I want this to be clear. He wasn't trying to be a rebel. He was simply marching to the beat of a different drum. He heard a different direction than people heard. And he was steadfast to the beat that was in his head and in his heart. He came to do the will of his father, and he never lost focus on that. He was never disobedient to the will of his father. Never. So when you look at that against the cultural backdrop, it looks like he's just trying to be anti, but he's not. He's not. He was just being himself. And being himself, he didn't fit in the current cultural context. And that's where I want us to understand that just being anti to be anti is not what being a Christian is all about. We have to make sure that we are following God's directions and doing his will at all times. And therein lies the problem for us. We got to learn first what our calling is, and then we have to choose to be faithful to that calling under all circumstances. The problem is that faithfulness to calling comes at a price. Comes at a price. And that is the complication that you and I have to deal with. That's the complication you and I have to reconcile our daily walk and witness with. We are, in fact, struggling because we're living in two worlds. Yeah, we're living in two worlds. And as much as we don't want to be conformists, we are. We're conformists. Yeah, we are. We it doesn't feel good when you go against the grain. It simply doesn't feel good. We don't want to be the odd man out. And I came to tell you that if you're on this walk with Jesus Christ, you're going to find yourself the odd man out. You're going to find that what we have been called to do is more often than not going to not fit in to a current cultural context. In fact, we will at this time, well, you know it better than I do. We make wrong right in this current cultural context, and we celebrate it. We celebrate not only wrong, we celebrate big wrong. We celebrate people who live wrong lavishly. We celebrate that. We celebrate people who make money harming other folk. We celebrate them. We know who they are. We live with them. We live with them. And we don't call it out. And so we have to figure out, where do we want to fall on this side? Now, I know we can step back and say, well, everybody's got to make their own choices. That's true. That's true. Everybody does have to make their own choices. But we have got to decide whose side we're going to be on. And we can't take profits from wrong while we say we're living right. We can't do that. Now, I know this gets complicated because we're talking about our family and our friends, and we're talking about, church and then good times. We're talking about all those things, and I just came to tell you what thus saith the Lord tonight. And so you can put it into whatever frame you want to put it in, but faithfulness means faithfulness at all times. At all times. And I'll go ahead and tell you right now, we have all fallen short. So I didn't come tonight to point the finger at anyone. I simply came to lay out the blueprint as it is, that if we're going to be the church, this is what's required to be the church. If you want to understand what's going on in these streets, as they say, then you also need to know what's not happening right in these churches. Churches are not calling out things that need to be called out, because the folks in the churches are doing the things as well. It's kind of hard to call someone else out when you're guilty of the same thing. And so it makes it very, very difficult for the church to be the example, the light on a hill that people can look to. But if we're going to draw others unto him, we have to reflect what he is and what he does. And that's the complication for us. John, in chapter 15, verses 18 and 19, tells us that this faithfulness comes at a price. If the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. If you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world. That is why the world hates you. That's the problem. No one wants to be on the downside of that. If you belong to the world's going to be okay with you. They're not going to call you out. But they hated me. And if you are mine and you're doing what I tell you to do, Jesus said, they're going to hate you too. And nobody wants to be hated. We want to be faithful, and we want to be liked and loved. And therein lies the complication. That's the problem with parents these days. We want our children to like us, to think we're cool. And all you have to do is raise your children for a little while, and you realize that it's going to be hard for us to be friends. And I need to leave that friendship thing alone, because I'm trying to get you to go in a certain direction for your own benefit, and you kicking against me. Yeah, I'm trying to help you get to a certain place in your life, and you pushing back on me. And so I've got to use some pressure in order to help you get to that space. You're not going to like that pressure. But I do know that that pressure is going to help you in the long run. And so, do I exert the pressure or do I worry about you liking me? I know what side I came down on. I came down on the pressure side. And I understand the consequences that come from that. Yeah. And it's interesting as I sit back and I look at the product that came from that. And I thank God I applied the pressure when I did. And I watch now as now generations turn over and certain decisions have to be made. It's simply not going to be possible for children and parents to be friends. It's not. It's the nature of young people to challenge systems and challenge rules. And if you are the system and the rule, you're going to be challenged. The same thing is true in church. And that's part of what we've done in churches. We've made church a place where everything is acceptable to everybody. And church was never designed to be that way. People come to church because it has certain rules. And when we remove them, then people don't know what to expect. If everybody can do whatever they want to, then there's no certainty there. And so we got to make sure that we are faithful to what Christ required us to do. We got to make sure that there's an expectation that when I come, I can rest assured that this is the product that I'm going to get. We're not trying to change the world. Watch this. We're not trying to change the world. That's too much of a task. That wasn't what we were called to do. But we are trying to change the hearts of the people in the world. And that's a different task. We're not trying to change the world. The world is going to be the system that it's going to be. What we're trying to do is change the hearts of the people in the world. And that's not easy, but it's easier than changing the world system. And so how do we do that? What is it? What does it mean to be the church in this context? Well, first thing is living faithfully means we got to be obedient. That's the first thing you need to know. You have to be obedient. Obedience is one of the concepts that we love and hate. We love for everybody to be obedient to us. We love it. We want our kids to be obedient. We want everybody that we have some supervisory context or oversight to be obedient to us. We favor obedience when it serves our wishes. We struggle with obedience when it's something that we got to do. Oh yeah, we struggle. We struggle with it. But I can tell you right now, obedience is necessary in order for us to be an effective church. We always ask why. We are why asking somebody. Yeah, why? Why we got to do that? Kids, you ever seen that? The commercial kids asking, come on, come help me clean up your room. Why? Because it's your room and you need it to be clean. Why? And so on and so forth. Why? Well, we do the same thing to God. We want to know why we have to always stay within the lines. Yeah. If we have, but the thing is, we ask why and think we have a right to know why. That's the problem. There's no problem asking why, but just understand you don't have a right to know why. God does not offer the prerogative of an answer. Being faithful to God doesn't mean God has to read us in on everything. Being faithful means trusting God, not being able to see the end goal, but believing that God has our benefit and purpose and best purposes in mind. That's what trusting God is. Trusting God means even though I can't see the end, I believe that God knows the end and I am going to follow him wherever he leads me. That's hard because we need to see it. We need to see it, but that's not faith. If we can see it in advance. There are some things in this walk of life that we only get to understand why we're doing it on a need to know basis. And many things we don't need to know. Yeah, that's a military term. We be given a mission and they'd say you need to go over and do A, B, C. There's no why are we doing that. Those are the orders. Go do A, B, C. And the outcome was on a need to know basis. If you needed to know, you would have already been read in on why. But all you need to do is execute A, B, and C. Somebody else is going to execute D, E, and F. That's crucial that you understand that. Not executing your part means there's a lack of faith on your part. D, E, and F will be nullified because A, B, and C haven't been done. But we want to know A through Z before we even start. Excuse me. Excuse me. I apologize. I've actually been home sick the last 2 days, no, the last 3 days from work, so I'm pushing through this tonight. Some of the things that we get into are above our pay grade. The decisions that are made, while they may be contingent on our behavior, the outcome is above our decision making. We just need for you to do what needs to be done. This is one of those evenings. I'm sorry. I about to have a power crisis here, I believe. Some of the things we have to have on a need to know basis, and it's above our pay grade. And you don't need to understand the why to do your part. That is a misnomer that you got to understand why in order to do your part. Let me tell you how this works. In order for us to take charge of this upcoming city, if we were in a battle, we need to knock this bridge out. Now, the way we're going to knock the bridge out is for a pilot to fly a plane over it and drop a bomb on the bridge. All right. All the pilot has to do is get in the plane and fly and release the bomb. That's all. He doesn't have to know what's going to happen after the bridge is knocked out. He doesn't have to know any of the other stuff. All he needs to do is his part. It's up to somebody else once the bridge is knocked out to go in and take charge of the city. That's somebody else's job. There's a person who's above the pilot, who's over the people who are going to go in after the pilot drops the bomb, who sees all that. Each one of the components don't have to see it. And that's how God is. He sees all the components as they come together. That's his position. And if we break many issues down in churches, it's like that. You don't have to know what every other auxiliary is doing for your auxiliary to do its part. All you have to do is be faithful to your part. That's all. If your job is ushering, if you just show up and usher, be faithful to that. That's essential to an orderly. It's not the only part, but you don't have to know in order to be effective in ushering on Sunday what the pastor's going to preach. It's not essential that you know that. It's not essential that you know. what the deacon's going to pray in order for you to do your part. You simply have to be faithful to your part. But too often we get so caught up in other aspects of the process that don't have anything to do with me doing my part. We keep pointing the finger at what someone else isn't doing, that we can't concentrate on the part that we're supposed to be doing. And when we do that, we are not being as faithful as we could be. We'll get upset because someone won't read us in on a particular process, even though it has nothing to do with us being faithful. Every member doesn't have to know everything in the church in order to be faithful. You're not being less than faithful because you don't know. And that's something that we get upset about sometimes, I believe. Yeah. We don't do well with uncertainty. We don't. People always want the why and the when. But sometimes the why and the when don't help you with your area of faithfulness. And sometimes the why and the when create other problems. Sometimes it does. I remember a situation in the church that I was told about where a member had taken some money from the church. And the pastor of the church at that time brought that information to the leadership of the church. And the leadership, someone in the leadership said, well, we got to tell the congregation about this. And the pastor at that time, a wise pastor, he'd been pastoring probably 30, 40 years total, said, we're not going to do that. We're not going to tell the congregation about this, not at this point. And one of the members of the leadership team was out of shape because he thought everybody had a right to know. And the pastor at that time said, well, uh, I'm going to advise you that this is not something we need to tell the congregation at this point in time because that knowledge would do more harm than good right now. This young leader couldn't understand that. And so he stormed out. Another meeting was convened about a week later to talk about this same issue. And that young leader came back to find out that at that time, the amount of money that had been taken had been repaid by the person's family to ensure that the church didn't lose any money. And at that time, when the money had been repaid, the conversation was turned again on whether or not the congregation should know. And the pastor at that time said, well, now we can tell because this is a different context now. If we had come forward with the information initially, it would have cast a pall on the entire family when the entire family didn't have anything to do with this issue. There was one member who did it. But human nature would have made the congregation look at the whole family in a negative light. And what I was trying to do was save the reputation of this family that didn't deserve this negative hit. At that point in time, the young leader understood that simply telling the why or what had happened would not have benefited anyone at that point in time other than just to tell folk. They still got the information, but they got it in a context where they understood that the church had been made whole and the person responsible was held accountable for what they did without impugning the reputation of that person's entire family. Sometimes it just takes some wisdom to deal with circumstances. And we rush to tell sometimes things that don't need to be told. That situation resolved favorably for that church congregation. And that church congregation, as far as I know, is still doing well now. And all the families that were involved in that church congregation are still involved in the church right now. Even the person who took the money has been brought back into the fold of that church congregation, as far as I know, because of the way it was handled. Could have gone a completely different way, but it's because somebody had a different perspective on how you look at a circumstance. Yeah. People always want to know why, but some things bear nuances. Yeah. And sometimes, just even in the pastorate I have at 45th Street, and the Lord tells me to do certain things, I don't even know why God wants me to do it. I don't even know why, but He just directs me to do A, B, or C, and I do it, and find out later this was the reason that God wanted me to do it, because He brings in pieces at different times. And so when you ask me why, and I say it's just what God wants us to do, that's a true statement, because I don't even understand why. I'm just trying to be obedient to the will of God. Perhaps you have that in your own life sometimes, where God has directed you to do something at your home or in your own walk or your witness, and you don't understand why God is telling you to do it. He's just telling you to do it, and the pieces don't come together for a while. God said so works. God says so. God, in his article that gives us some direction, I think poetically, Jacob likens a walk of faith to God giving you just enough light to see the step you're on or the next step you're on, but he doesn't give you enough light to see the whole landscape. Just enough light for the step I'm on. Yeah, is what he gives us. And that's faith. Lord, give me just enough light for this step that I'm on. So I know you're guiding me. That's what we need to ask the Lord for. And so we need to ask him to make sure that we are being obedient. And then we need to make sure that we experience what's called, or we participate in what's called an open-ended generosity. Open-ended generosity. Let's see if I can explain this to you. This is what being faithful implies. Open-ended generosity. Generosity is not reserved just for crises, just for tornadoes and hurricanes and fires, but being consistently generous to people to a fault is the kind of open-ended generosity we see in scripture. What I mentioned earlier was just programmatic generosity. Something happens, the church responds, just like in all these instances in Hurricane Katrina. The church responded overwhelmingly to that incident. Yeah, there was so much generosity there. But I'm talking about open-ended, consistent generosity to the ongoing hunger, homelessness, problems we have in our community. That's the kind of generosity that moves people. Yes, help me if I'm in my immediate struggle. But what about this ongoing problem that I have? That's the kind of generosity I want us to get used to. I want us to participate ongoingly, sacrificially in situations. But most churches won't give sacrificially. That's just not happening. We're not going to give till it hurts. We're going to give programmatically. Yeah. We're not going to feed every person that comes. We got budgeted to feed 150 people. That's how many people we're going to feed. If you understand what I'm saying now. We got to calculate the cost. Now, I know that's a good business sense, but that's not the sense that Christ talked about. Christ wants us to help whoever needs helping. Christ doesn't want us to help 500 people and then stop because our budget won't bear us helping 550. That's not the kind of generosity that the Bible talks about. The Bible talks about us being generous. The Bible talks about us helping everybody that needs help. Sacrificial generosity. Yeah. What areas do we need to grow in this in our own church congregation at 45th Street? What areas do we need to grow in that area in? What can we be more generous in? How can we help more people? There are some areas that we do well. There's some people that we help when we need to. But what are the areas that we're not helping? What are the areas that we're not supporting? How do we get better? How are we going to be more obedient to the will of God in that respect? There are more. I can tell you right now, just to use a reference point, I thought we did a great job when we were with the STAIR program. We were helping as many kids as they would give us from. Well, we couldn't help as many kids as they would give us because we could never get as many tutors. And so therein lies the point. Now, everybody can't tutor. Reverend Sparks, for one, struggles with tutoring. All right, because it implies a level of patience that Reverend Sparks discovered that he didn't have in that space. But there were other things that I could do to support that ministry. Are we all doing everything we can to make sure that our babies know how to read? All right. I might not be able to tutor, but I can help buy books or I can help support the tutors who are tutoring. Are we doing everything we can from a church standpoint? Are we giving until there's nothing else we can think of that we can give? Are there areas in our neighborhood that we could be helping with that we are doing the very best we can do? That's 6 churches on Division Avenue. And I wonder if every church was given every bit that it could, what problems we could solve just on Division Avenue. Just on Division Avenue, what issues could we resolve just on that avenue? How faithful would the neighbors be if we were doing everything we could to help them with the issues that they have on that street alone, just in that community right there? Generosity to a fault. Nobody should be hungry on that street. Are people hungry on that street at night? Are children going unfed on Division Avenue at night? Do we know? Do we know? Do we care? In the neighborhood around us, are children going to bed at night? And are we okay with that because we've exceeded the amount that we voted that we were going to give in benevolence? Corporate generosity depends on individual generosity. Corporate generosity. Church giving depends on your giving. That's where it comes from. The church has determined that it wants to give a certain amount of money annually. That's a great thing. That's a great thing. But that generosity is, from a church standpoint, is limited by how generous we are as members. Generosity. The spirit of the gospel is an open type of generosity. It gives and it asks nothing in return. All right. It spends itself on others. It spends itself fully. That's the spirit of the gospel. All right. It's hostile to calculation. That's the spirit of the first church. Whatever anybody needed, they got from the church. Now I realize people have learned to take advantage of that. All right. But that becomes, we saw a spiritual thing too, because those who took advantage of that open ended generosity were dealt with by the Lord, and they suffered a horrible fate. All right. When they tried to get over on the spirit of the Lord, they found out that they couldn't do it and they found death imminent. They found problems imminently. when they tried to get over. And so all we have to do is give with the right spirit, and God takes care of the rest. Not only does He bless the efforts, and that's not why we're doing it, but He also replenishes the coffers for more of that type generosity. I wonder what happened if we just went all in. That's the kind of generosity that's called for in the church. That's what we're talking about. When we talk about, when we sit down and we say, let's just help folks, how can we help people? How can we do it? Let's have that conversation. How can we help people? And then set about doing it. And then lastly, faithfulness is marked by an uncommon love. All right. I've said to you throughout the years that I've been with you, beloved, that the imperative in Christ, in the Bible, is love. For God so loved. Christ so loved us that He was willing to give His life. Yeah. The world was given a way to judge us. The world was given a way to judge us. That's a test. The church is to be loving. We're supposed to be loving in a dying culture. People are supposed to come to us and feel love and see love. That's supposed to be our tattoo, love. How then does a dying culture know that we are doing the work of the church? How? Jesus says, by this shall all men know that you are my disciples, if you have love one for the other. That's how people know we're doing Christ's work. If we love people, that's the litmus test. When we love people, not because of what they do, but just because we love people. And what we fail to do consistently is love everybody. We draw boxes around who we love, the things they do. We love this, we don't love that. You got to live this kind of way. You got to be this kind of way in order to get our love. And I came to tell you that's not right. Uncommon love. Christ continued talking about it. Uncommon love. He talked about it at every turn. The Good Samaritan, uncommon. On the cross, uncommon love. That's what He requires of us. God bless you tonight for being with me. I appreciate it. I'm sorry I'm choked up tonight. I'm getting better. I appreciate you. God bless you. We'll see you next time on 45 Minutes of